She took in children nobody wanted, and every 12 months, without fail, one of them disappeared. She called it bad luck. She called it restlessness. She called it children being children, running off before they could be loved properly. But the village of Udo had started counting, even if no one dared say the number out loud. Until the morning, a barefoot girl walked through the market gate, past every stall, past every curious eye, and knocked on that woman's door like she already lived there. This panther has been waiting to tell you this one. Get comfortable. You won't want to leave in the middle of it. In Udo, everyone called her Mama Ijeoma. Her real name was Grace, though almost no one used it anymore. Strangers who came expecting a witch left confused. She had soft hands, a swept-clean compound, and a pot of stew that never seemed to run out, no matter how many mouths showed up to eat from it. She greeted every child with a full smile and never raised her voice. She was, by every visible measure, exactly the kind of woman you'd hand your daughter to without thinking twice. That was always the problem with her. Every few months, a girl would turn up at her gate, always a stranger to Udo, always without people nearby to ask questions, always the first daughter of wherever she'd come from. Mama Ijeoma would take her in, feed her, give her a mat by the fire, and the village would nod to itself. Good, someone is looking after the lost ones. Then, almost exactly a year later, the girl would be gone. Mama Ijeoma always had a story ready. The girl was homesick. The girl was difficult. The girl slipped out one night and never came back, the way restless girls do. Because none of them belonged to Udo. Because no one in the village had a name to grieve. The story was swallowed each time, and life moved on. Except for the children. Children see what grown-ups have trained themselves not to. They noticed that Mama Ijeoma's own daughter, a solemn 19-year-old named Ngozi, never Dorj, once got close to any of the wards. She'd share her food, sweep the same yard, sleep under the same roof, but she wouldn't learn their names if she could help it. And every time a new girl arrived at the gate, something crossed Ngozi's face that wasn't welcome at all. It looked, if you caught it quick enough, like mourning. To understand any of this, you have to go back 13 years, to a night Udo has no record of. Ngozi was 5 and dying. The fever came the way the cruelest ones do, fast, and without warning. By the second night, her skin burned hot enough that her mother couldn't wee. Without pulling back, the healers came, tried what they knew, and left without meeting Grace's eyes. Her husband had already begun the quiet, terrible preparations people make when hope has run out. So Grace did what a mother does when every human door has shut in her face. She walked to the black water at the edge of the forest, alone, past midnight, and she called out to whatever might be listening. Something was. The air turned cold first. Not the cold of weather, the cold of something arriving. Then a voice rose out of the water itself, quiet, almost kind. The way a trap is kind right up until it closes. It told her it could save the child. It told her Ngozi would live, would grow tall and strong, would never burn with fever again. All it wanted in exchange was something simple. Once every 12 months, Grace would bring a first daughter to the water's edge, and the water would take her, miss a single cycle, and Ngozi would not see sunrise. Grace stood at that water for a long time. Then she said yes. And that's the part of this story that should frighten you the most. She wasn't a wicked woman. She was a mother, standing at the very last open door in her world, and she walked through it. If you're watching this from somewhere tonight, drop your country below. This panther likes knowing exactly who's listening in the dark. And wherever you are, you're supposed to be there. 13 years passed. 12 girls went to the water and never came home. Grace stopped counting after the 4th one. Counting made it real. Instead, she built herself a routine. Find the girl, keep her close, walk her to the water when the 12th month closed, and try not to learn her name. Ngozi grew into a girl who spoke little and noticed everything. She'd done her own counting, quietly, without being taught to. She didn't know the shape of what she was counting toward. Only that something about the rhythm of arrivals and disappearances didn't know the shape of what she was counting. Nothing let it right in her chest. So she learned, without anyone showing her how, to keep new faces at arm's length. It was the only way she knew how to survive inside that house. Then, on an ordinary blue sky morning, with the market loud and the sun already high, a girl walked into Udo. Her name was Uzoamaka. She wasn't striking to look at. Small, thin, a cloth bundle slung over one shoulder. Walking with the unhurried certainty of someone who was exactly where she meant to be. She didn't stop to ask directions. She didn't glance at the market stalls or the children by the well. She crossed the village like she'd walked its roads 100 times before, went straight to Mama Ijeoma's gate and knocked once. Grace opened the door and looked at her. The girl looked back with eyes that were unnervingly still. Not the stillness of someone with nothing to say, but the stillness of something too deep to be stirred by whatever moved across its surface. Something in Grace's chest told her to shut the door. But the red thread was already tied to the gatepost. The 12 months had already begun, and she felt it the way she always felt it. That cold, borrowed instinct planted in her 13 years ago. This girl was a first daughter. She pushed the door wider instead. Come in. Uzoamaka stepped over the threshold, and with no wind to explain it, every flame in the house leaned sideways at once, like they were bowing, or flinching. The first week was quiet. Uzoamaka cooked without being asked, moved through the compound, like she was careful not to take up more space than she needed. The old dog, who barked at every new arrival on principle, slept curled at her feet the very first night, and didn't stir until morning. The whole house felt different with her in it. Not louder, just cleaner, the way air feels after a hard rain finally lets up. Ngozi watched her from a distance for days. On the 5th day, she sat beside her while they sorted dried fish, and when Ngozi sliced her thumb open on a cracked pot, Uzoamaka took her hand and held it between both of hers without a word. When Ngozi looked down again, the bleeding had already stopped. The cut was closing before her eyes. That night, Grace lit the shrine flame in the back room, the way she'd done for 13 years without fail. It guttered wildly the second her fingers touched it, then shrank down to almost nothing, as though something outside it were leaning in and pressing it flat. The voice came to her 11 nights after Uzoamaka arrived, and it didn't wait for the ritual hour. It simply arrived, the cold filling the room first, then the voice, low and fast like water over stone. Send this one early. Don't wait for the 12th month. In 13 years, it had never once changed the terms. She's a girl, same as the rest, Grace said. A long silence. Too long. She is not the rest, it finally answered. Send her now, before the month is finished. The cold pulled back and left her alone in the dark, shaking, because she understood exactly what it meant. If the thing in the water was afraid of one small girl with a cloth bundle, then Uzoamaka was something it had never planned for. And for the first time in 13 years, Grace was standing somewhere she didn't understand. 3 weeks into the month, Ngozi woke burning with fever. Grace pressed a hand to her daughter's forehead and felt the floor tilt under her. She knew this fever. She'd been dreading it for 13 years. This was warning dressed as illness, a reminder of exactly what still had its hand around her throat. She stood in Ngozi's doorway, watching her sleep, then walked down the hall and stood in Uzoamaka's doorway instead. The girl was sitting up in the dark, wide awake, watching the window. I know about the fever, she said softly. Grace's hands found the doorframe and gripped it. Then you know I have no choice. Uzoamaka's eyes didn't move. You have the same choice you've always had. You've just never let yourself believe it was real. My daughter is sick. She's warm, Uzoamaka said. She isn't dying. There's a difference. And you've known the difference since the night you learned it, at that water's edge. She rose slowly. Before you go tonight, sit with her, look at her face, then ask yourself if she'd want every year of her life bought at this price, if she knew what it cost. The words went in slow, like a blade turned sideways. She knows, Uzoamaka added, quieter now. Not everything. Enough. Go look at your daughter, and then decide. If this story has settled somewhere in your chest right now, tell one person about it tonight. Just one. This panther believes the stories that find you are the ones you were always meant to carry. Howard. Hit the like button before we go on. Grace sat beside her daughter. Ngozi was already awake, had been for a while. Neither spoke as the lamp between them threw their shadows across the wall. Then Ngozi reached under her sleeping mat and drew out something that stopped her mother's rote. Heart cold. 12 red threads. Small, folded with care, every single one saved. She'd kept them all, said nothing, carried the weight of it alone for years, because she loved her mother and didn't know how to hold both truths in the same hand. Mama, she said. Her voice didn't shake. I don't want this anymore. Grace broke. Not loudly, the way old, load-bearing things break. Quietly, completely, without any way back. She pulled her daughter close, and 13 years of careful distance came apart in a single moment. She wept into her hair until there was nothing left in her to weep with. She did not go to the water that night. She held her daughter and waited. By morning, the way real fevers break, Ngozi's skin cooled and her breathing steadied. She slept. Grace understood, finally, what that meant. The things hold over her had only ever lived inside her own belief that there was no other door. The instant she chose differently, the wall started to crack. The voice didn't wait for the ritual hour that night either. It came at midnight, and it came furious. The compound went cold from the floor up. Every lamp died at once. The dark thickened into something deliberate. Not ordinary night, but the kind of dark that feeds. The bargain isn't finished. The debt isn't cleared. Send the girl, or the child dies before sunrise. Grace stood in the middle of the room, legs shaking, and didn't move. No, one word, the most expensive word she'd ever spoken. The cold pressed harder, turned to pain, the walls seeming to breathe inward. And then, Uzoamaka stepped out of the corner where she'd standing, and the voice stopped. She looked at it the way still water looks at a stone dropped into it, absorbing, unbothered. Something that had existed long before the disturbance, and would still be there after it. Settled. Her debt is finished, Uzoamaka said, calm all the way through. Because she ended it. And you, she took one step closer, don't belong to that water. You borrowed it. And I'm telling you, on behalf of what that river actually is, your time here is done. The cold surged one last time, vicious and desperate, the way power feels right before it loses. Then it broke, like a fever breaking, like a door swinging shut from the inside. The lamps came back. The air warmed. Somewhere outside, the water made a sound. Udo had never heard from it before. Low, final, like something ancient exhaling for the last time. By morning, the whole village knew, because Grace told them herself. She didn't wait to be found out. She stood in the center of the square, in full daylight, and said it plainly, without softening a single part. 12 girls, 13 years, every red thread, every lie she'd built carefully enough to half believe herself. She told them what her yes had actually cost. Not her. Them. 12 families in distant towns, still waiting on daughters who were never coming home, who'd never been told why. Some people wept. Some screamed. A woman passing through Udo, that day fell to her knees in the dirt when she realized her niece had left for this village 3 years earlier and never been heard from since. Some people picked up stones. Some turned their backs and never spoke to Grace again as long as they lived. She didn't flinch from any of it. She let it land the way it was owed to land. Ngozi stood beside her through the whole confession, not because what her mother did was right, but because she'd decided her mother wouldn't fall through this alone. It wasn't forgiveness. It was quieter than that, and it cost more. When the square emptied, Grace began the second, longer journey. 12 homes, 12 towns, door to door, carrying nothing but the truth and the understanding that some things can only be faced, not fixed. Some doors slammed before she finished a sentence. Some mothers wept on her shoulder for reasons she didn't feel she'd earned. Some just looked at her a long time in silence and shut the door quietly, which was somehow the worst of all. She made every visit. She skipped none of them. When she came home, the house felt larger in the wrong way, quieter than quiet. Uzoamaka had stayed through all of it, cooking, sitting with Ngozi in the evenings, teaching her a low, unhurried melody in a language nobody in Udo had ever heard, one that sounded older than any place on a map. On the morning of the 12th day, her room was empty. The cloth bundle was gone. The sleeping mat sat folded at the foot of the bed, exactly the way it had on her first morning. There, the old dog sat at the gate and stared down the road for a full hour before finally coming inside and lying down with something like grief in its body. The only thing left behind was a smooth, dark stone on the windowsill of Ngozi's room. It was warm, not sun-warm, but warm from somewhere inside itself, steady and quiet. Ngozi would hold it in both hands whenever the world got heavy. She was holding it the morning she packed her own bundle. She didn't leave in anger. There was no accusation, no letter left behind a closed door. She simply arrived at a truth the way certain truths come, not as a sudden discovery, but as something you'd always half known and were finally ready to carry. She couldn't build a life on this foundation. She still loved her mother. That hadn't changed and never would. But love isn't the same thing as staying. Sometimes love is what you take with you when you go. She held her mother at the gate for a long time. Neither said anything. There was nothing the embrace didn't already say. Then she walked down the road without looking back. Grace stood at the gate and watched until the road curved and the trees swallowed her daughter whole. In that exact, unrepeatable second, her sight went out. No warning, no pain. The world simply went dark and stayed there. She stood gripping the gatepost, understanding in the way a body understands before the mind catches up. Exactly what had happened and exactly why. 13 years she'd looked directly at what she was doing and refused to see it. Now there was nothing left to refuse. She found her way back inside with her hands. The next morning she got up and went back to work. Different work now. A borrowed cane in one hand, her free arm out ahead of her. Years went by. Enough that Udo stopped keeping count. Grace learned the world again in the dark. Every morning before rising, she spoke the names of the 12 girls aloud. Not because it changed anything, but because those names deserved to be spoken by someone who understood exactly what they sensed. She helped where she was allowed to. Some in Udo accepted it. Most never did. She gave it to both, without keeping score of who took it. Then, on an ordinary morning, years into that changed life, she woke before dawn and lay still in the dark, and noticed the dark was different. Light came back slowly, finding its way around every edge. Shapes first, then shadows, then the room. Every crack in the mud wall, exactly where memory had always kept it. She sat up. She didn't weep. She simply received it, the way years of darkness had taught her to receive things without demanding to understand them first. Her eyes found the windowsill. The smooth stone sat where it had sat for years. She'd traced its edges in the dark 100 times, felt its warmth through the coldest nights, never once seen it. It was glowing, soft, the way embers glow once the fire's gone down and only the truest heat is left. The same warmth her hands had always known, visible now, undeniable. She crossed the room, picked it up, held it to her chest, and closed her eyes. Not because the light was too much, but because some things are better felt than watched. Somewhere down the road her daughter had taken years before, a bird started singing. Grace stood in the growing morning, with the warm stone against her heart, and breathed. The debt was never cleared, it never would be, but the morning came anyway, not as a reward, not as forgiveness, just mourning, offering itself to whoever was still standing there to receive it. She was still standing, and somewhere down that road, her daughter was gone, and standing too. That would have to be enough. It was. This panther carried this one a long way to bring it to you tonight. Farvi doesn't pick stories by accident. She picks the ones that already know something about you. If this one found you, if something in it pressed on something true, leave a word below. One word is enough. This panther reads every one. Tell me where in the world you watched from tonight. And if you're new here, you didn't stumble onto this by chance. You were brought here. Subscribe, and let Farvi keep finding you with the stories you were always meant to hear. She'll be back. She always comes back.